The title comes from William Butler Yeats in one of his collections of Irish folk tales. And it is the story of the white trout, which I will not try to tell you, but it's easy to find the story. But it has to do with soldiers' interactions, let's say, with a trout. And the trout has a kind of identity beyond its troutness, let's say. And it's written in dialect. I'm not sure that's the right word, but it's written with these spellings that are not familiar to me and so on, that are meant, I assume, to approximate speech, casual speech, let's say. Scholars, I think, scholars would have a lot to say about Yeats's collections now. So this one is actually credited to another person. And I found some research just today, actually, about how much he might have taken from others. So I don't have all the details on how he compiled these, but he, in any case, was interested in Celtic stories and gathered them together. So yeah, and the origin of that piece comes about through the choreographer I mentioned, Joan Wadman, and way back in, I think it must have been 1997, we did a collaboration that was called The Eels of Lugur, which had a relationship to this story. And we did something that was a little bit like how film composers sometimes work, which is, if you're familiar with the idea of a temp track. So in order to choreograph, she was using music temporarily, and then I was going to write a score for it. And she gave me bunches of things to listen to. One of them it was a recording of what I guess is Irish music that was, it was a cassette that had been copied and copied and copied, a cassette. And so it didn't have any label, but I heard this music and I said, wow, so I'd like to arrange that for the ballet. So, and it really bothered me at that time that I couldn't identify it, so I made this arrangement of what I hoped was a folk tune in the public domain, but I also just wanted to know what it was. And so these days one could find out what it is, and I found out some more recently, let's say. But the other thing that's really generated the piece was that Roger Zahab, who's on your program, was playing the score to this piece, and we had live music, which is really wonderful. It's a luxury when it can be done. So he was playing, and I transcribed this beautiful air, slow tune, and put in a lot of details, of the ornaments and so on. And I really was very fond of Roger's playing, but when he showed up at rehearsal and played it, I was stunned by it, just how beautifully he played it with all the nuance and delicacy and so on. So I took that away after the ballet was done. And the other thing that influenced it, that relates to some of the questions you were asking about working relationships, is that Roger is and has been very generous to people, including his students. And so this is going back 20 years when I was a grad student, and he wrote pieces in honor of his students, and he often embraced their participation in his performances and so on. So I turned the piece into a duo that he could play with a student. And that relationship is actually written into the piece in a way. But it was very much about that, about his playing of the tune and then his way of working with others. I did identify the second tune in the piece. So I just wanted to mention that the Irish sessions that I mentioned that I like to play in when we could go outside and inside and sit close to one another and breathe on each other. There's a wonderful Irish session in New Hope, Pennsylvania that has different people leading it, but one of the teams who leads it is Deirdre Lockman and Corey Purcell. And there are a number of tunes that I got, as people say, I got this from. So Deirdre played a lot of tunes on fiddle that I liked. One day she just played this tune. I said, oh, I have to know what that is. I'm always taking these notes. And so she identified it for me as the Roscommon Reel, which is pretty well known. And I found some beautiful recordings of it. But when I went back to the Sojer and the Throut, I said, oh, there's the Roscommon Reel. I didn't know, what was on that third generation tape that Joan gave me. And decades later, I learned the tune kind of in the, I don't want to say the right way, but
Uh-huh.
in the more conventional, appropriate, way. So
Uh-huh.
that was wild. It's pretty atypical for me to have a piece that has so many versions, in regard to the specificity and individual player thing we were talking about before. And there was something about this. First of all, I like the slow tune, and I could imagine someone playing it on its own. If they did that, they're really not playing my music; they're playing my transcription of it. And then it can be done as a duo, so I add a second part to it. But it's just that the two tunes are so separate that I could imagine the slow part being done on its own. Um, and I had one other piece that could be done on flute or violin. So I think that allowed me to think of this, and that the register is pretty compatible. It's only been played on flute a little bit. I really do think of it as a violin duo. So in the Sojer and the Trout, part of the pattern is that the first player, so I think of that as the teacher, starts out
Right.
and then they take turns. So the end, the culmination is that the student has taken over from the teacher and is kind of soaring up high.